Millionaire's mother broke every maid who dared enter her mansion, but what one woman did next will leave you speechless. Get out! Get out! Madame Elahour's voice echoed through the marble corridors as another maid fled in tears, her uniform torn and dignity shattered. Useless girl! You think you can work in my house with those clumsy hands? The heavy oak door slammed shut, and silence returned to the opulent mansion. This was Tuesday. By Friday, the employment agency would send another hopeful soul, and by the following Tuesday, they too would be gone. If you're enjoying this story of resilience and hidden truths, please hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible family stories, and share this with friends who believe in the power of love conquering all. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, we love hearing your perspectives. Madame Elahour Okoro ruled her son Derek's mansion like an empress defending her throne. At 68, she carried herself with the regal bearing of old money, her silver hair always perfectly coiffed, her jewelry always gleaming. She had earned her reputation as the woman no domestic worker could please, and she wore it like a badge of honor. My Derek deserves only perfection, she would tell her bridge club friends over afternoon tea. These girls today have no standards, no respect. They think because my son is generous, they can slack off in my presence. The truth was darker. Madame Elahour had driven away 17 maids in 2 years, each one lasting no more than 14 days. She would find fault in everything, a glass not polished to mirror brightness, a flower arrangement 2 inches off-center, a greeting delivered without sufficient reverence. But her cruelest weapon was humiliation. She once made a maid rewash every dish in the house because she claimed to smell poor people's soap on the china. Another time, she forced a young woman to scrub the marble floors with a toothbrush because her mopping technique was peasant-like. The maids would endure for days, sometimes weeks, hoping the generous salary would make the abuse worthwhile. But Madame Elahour always found their breaking point. Derek, her 42-year-old son, remained blissfully unaware of his mother's reign of terror. As CEO of Okoro Industries, he spent most days at the office, trusting his mother to manage their household staff. When maids quit, she would simply tell him they were unsuitable or had family emergencies. Derek, devoted to his mother since his father's death, never questioned her judgment. Then came the morning that would change everything. Amaka arrived on a rainy Thursday, carrying a small suitcase and wearing a simple blue dress that had seen better days. She was perhaps 35, with gentle eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. When the agency coordinator introduced her, Madame Elahour's lips curved into a predatory smile. "Another one," she murmured, circling Amaka like a hawk studying prey. "Tell me, girl, what makes you think you can succeed where 17 others have failed?" Amaka's voice was soft but steady. "I'm here to work, ma'am. Nothing more, nothing less. We'll see about that." The first test came within hours. Madame Elahour accidentally knocked over a vase of fresh orchids, sending water and flowers cascading across the Persian rug. "Clean it up," she commanded. "And if there's even a hint of water damage, you're gone." Amaka knelt without complaint, carefully gathering each petal, dabbing the moisture with precision. She worked in silence while Madame Elahour watched, waiting for signs of frustration or tears. There were none. The second test was more vicious. During dinner preparation, Madame Elahour claimed the soup was too salty, though she hadn't tasted it. She grabbed the pot and dumped its contents into the sink. "Start over. My son will be home in an hour, and if his dinner isn't perfect, you'll join that soup down the drain." Amaka simply nodded and began again. By the end of the first week, Madame Elahour's frustration was palpable. This maid didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't even flinch when insulted. She moved through the house like a ghost, completing every task with quiet efficiency. She would wake before dawn to pray in the garden, her lips moving silently as she knelt among the roses. "What's wrong with you?" Madame Elahour finally snapped on day 10. "Are you simple? Deaf? Why don't you fight back?" Amaka paused in her dusting, meeting the older woman's eyes with unsettling calm. Fighting back won't make the work any easier, ma'am. The breaking point came during one of Madame Ellahor's bridge parties. With 6 wealthy women watching, she decided to deliver her cruelest humiliation yet. As Amaka served tea, Madame Ellahor tripped, sending a full pitcher of ice water cascading over the maid's head. The guests gasped. Water dripped from Amaka's hair, soaking her uniform, pooling at her feet. The room fell silent, waiting for the inevitable breakdown, the tears, the dramatic exit they'd witnessed so many times before. Instead, Amaka quietly set down the empty pitcher, grabbed a towel, and began cleaning the floor. "I'm so sorry, ladies," she said softly. "Let me get you fresh tea." As she walked toward the kitchen, water still dripping from her clothes, something flickered in her eyes, not defeat, but something far more dangerous. The clock struck midnight when Madame Ellahor's world began to crumble. She had been feeling unwell all evening, dismissing it as fatigue from her bridge party triumph. But as she lay in her silk-sheeted bed, her chest tightened with a pain that stole her breath away. "Help," she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible. The pain intensified, radiating down her left arm like liquid fire. Panic seized her as she realized what was happening. "Help me." Her trembling fingers fumbled for the bedside bell, the one connected to the servants' quarters. She pressed it frantically, over and over, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, soft, measured, unhurried. Amaka appeared in the doorway, still wearing her simple nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the dim light, she looked almost ethereal. "Ma'am." Amaka's voice held no trace of the urgency Madame Ellahor expected. "You called." I can't breathe," Madame Ellahor gasped, clutching her chest. "Something's wrong. Call Derek. Call the doctor. Call someone." Amaka moved closer, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. She reached for the bedside lamp, flooding the room with warm light. "Let me check your pulse first." Her fingers were gentle as they found Madame Ellahor's wrist, surprisingly skilled as they counted the rapid, irregular beats. "Your heart is racing, but you're not having a heart attack. This feels like a panic episode." "How would you know?" Madame Ellahor snapped, though her voice lacked its usual venom. Fear had stripped away her armor of arrogance. "I know many things," Amaka replied quietly, settling into the chair beside the bed. "Would you like me to call Derek?" "No." The response was immediate, desperate. "Don't wake him. He has that important meeting tomorrow. Just stay with me. Please." The word "please" felt foreign on Madame Ellahor's tongue. She couldn't remember the last time she'd asked anyone for anything, let alone begged. But terror had a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. Amaka nodded and remained seated, her presence oddly comforting. "Tell me about the pain. When did it start?" As the minutes ticked by, Madame Ellahor found herself talking, really talking, for the first time in years. She spoke about her fears, her loneliness since her husband's death, her desperate need to protect Derek from women who might hurt him the way she'd been hurt. "I lost my first love to another woman," she whispered, her eyes distant. "She was younger, prettier, from a better family. I swore I'd never let Derek experience that kind of betrayal." Amaka's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her eyes. "So you decided to choose his partners for him?" "I decided to protect him," Madame Ellahor corrected, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "That girl he was with 3 years ago, Amara, she was all wrong for him. Poor family, no connections, no understanding of our world. She would have dragged him down. What happened to her?" Madame Ellahor's breathing had steadied, but her grip on Amaka's hand remained tight. "I made her see reason. Told her she'd never fit in, that she'd only embarrass Derek in front of his business associates. Smart girl, she left without making a scene. And Derek? He was heartbroken for a while, but I found him someone better. Chioma, from the Okafor family. Wealthy, educated, perfect breeding. They married within 6 months. Amaka was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing gentle circles on Madame Elahor's palm. And where is Chioma now? She left last year, Madame Elahor admitted reluctantly. Said she couldn't handle the pressure of living up to our family standards. Ungrateful girl. Derek gave her everything. Everything except his heart. The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and penetrating. Madame Elahor studied Amaka's face in the lamplight, noticing for the first time the elegant curve of her cheekbones, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her humble clothes. You're different from the others, Madame Elahor said slowly. Why haven't you quit? Why do you endure my treatment? Amaka smiled then, but it wasn't the gentle, submissive expression Madame Elahor had grown accustomed to. This smile held secrets, held power, held something that made the older woman's blood run cold. Because I have something to finish here, Amaka said softly. Something that began 3 years ago when you destroyed the most beautiful love story I'd ever witnessed. Madame Elahor's heart began racing again, but this time it wasn't from panic. It was from recognition, a terrible, dawning recognition that made her mouth go dry. I won't leave you tonight, Amaka continued, her voice still gentle but now carrying an undertone of steel. I won't abandon you in your moment of need, even after everything you did when you stole my husband from me. The words hit Madame Elahor like physical blows. Her eyes widened in horror as Amaka reached up and slowly removed the simple scarf that had covered her hair for 2 weeks. Rich, lustrous curls tumbled free, curls that Madame Elahor remembered, curls that had once been adorned with orange blossoms on a wedding day that never came. With deliberate movements, Amaka wiped away the subtle makeup that had aged her face, revealing the smooth skin beneath. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and in that moment, the humble maid disappeared entirely. Hello, Madame Elahor, she said, her voice now carrying the educated accent she'd carefully hidden. My name is Amara Okafor. I believe you remember me. Madame Elahor's scream caught in her throat, emerging as nothing more than a strangled whisper. No. No, this isn't possible. You left. You disappeared. I did, Amara confirmed, settling back in her chair with the poise of a queen holding court. But I never stopped loving your son. And I never stopped wondering if he truly chose Chioma, or if his mother made that choice for him. The room spun around Madame Elahor as the full magnitude of her situation crashed over her. For 2 weeks, she had been served by, humiliated by, and ultimately comforted by the very woman she'd driven from her son's life. The irony was so complete, so devastating, that she could only stare in stunned silence. Now, Amara said, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she'd used as a maid, let's talk about what happens next. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's grand windows as Derek's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway. He had cut his business trip short, driven by an inexplicable urgency to return home. Something in his mother's voice during their brief phone call had unsettled him, though she'd insisted everything was fine. Amara heard the car doors slam and felt her heart leap against her ribs. 3 years of wondering, 3 years of sleepless nights, 3 years of loving a man she'd been told didn't want her, it all came down to this moment. He's home, she whispered to Madame Elahor, who sat rigid in her chair, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her face pale with shock and something that might have been shame. Please, the older woman whispered, her voice hoarse from a night of tears and confessions. Please don't tell him like this. Let me explain first. Let me. No more lies, Amara said firmly, but not unkindly. He deserves the truth. We all do. Derek's footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, accompanied by his familiar whistle, the same tune he used to hum while cooking breakfast for Amara in their tiny apartment, back when love was simple and the world felt full of possibilities. Mama, his voice called out, warm with concern. I got your message. Are you feeling better? Amara closed her eyes, drinking in the sound of his voice like a woman dying of thirst. When she opened them, Derek stood in the doorway, and time seemed to fracture around them. He was exactly as she remembered, tall and lean, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, his tie slightly askew from the long drive. But there were new lines around those eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before, as if joy had slowly leaked out of him over the years. Derek's briefcase slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. He stared at Amara as if she were a ghost, a dream, a miracle he was afraid to believe in. "Hello, Derek," she said softly, rising from her chair with the same grace she'd shown while serving his mother tea just days before. "Amara?" The name escaped him like a prayer, like a question, like a wound reopening. "But, how, you're the maid? You've been here all this time?" "2 weeks," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "2 weeks of watching your mother try to break me, just like she broke us." Derek's gaze snapped to his mother, who seemed to shrink under his scrutiny. "Mama, what is she talking about?" Madame Ellahor's hands trembled as she reached for her son. "Derek, my dear boy, I can explain. I was protecting you. That girl." "That woman," Derek corrected sharply, his voice carrying an edge Amara had never heard before, "is the love of my life. The woman I've mourned for 3 years. The woman who disappeared without explanation, leaving me to wonder what I'd done wrong." "You did nothing wrong," Amara said, stepping closer to him. "Your mother came to see me the day before our wedding. She told me you'd realized you were making a mistake, that you were too ashamed to call it off yourself. She said you'd asked her to handle it quietly, to spare us both the embarrassment." Derek's face went white. "She told you what?" "She said you'd found someone more suitable, someone who could give you the life you deserved. She had pictures of you with Chioma, documents showing her family's wealth, proof that you'd already started the process of joining your businesses. Those were preliminary discussions." Derek exploded, whirling on his mother. "Chioma's father wanted to explore a merger. I told you I wasn't interested, that I was getting married." Madame Ellahor's composure finally cracked completely. "She wasn't right for you. Look at her, she's working as a maid. She has no education, no connections, no, she has a master's degree in literature," Derek said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "She speaks 4 languages. She volunteers at the children's hospital every weekend. And she loved me when I had nothing but dreams and a second-hand car." He turned back to Amara, his eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. "Why didn't you fight for us? Why didn't you come to me?" Amara's composure finally wavered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Because I loved you too much to trap you in a marriage you didn't want. Because I thought if you truly loved me, you would have come after me. I tried." Derek's voice broke. "I searched everywhere. I hired investigators. Your landlord said you'd moved out in the middle of the night, left no forwarding address. Your phone was disconnected. It was like you'd vanished from the earth. I went to my aunt in Abuja," Amara whispered. "I was pregnant, Derek. I was carrying our child." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face cycling through shock, joy, and then devastating loss. I lost the baby 2 months later. The stress, the heartbreak, the doctor said my body just couldn't." She couldn't finish the sentence. Derek closed the distance between them in 3 quick strides, pulling her into his arms with desperate tenderness. "Oh, my love. My beautiful, brave love. I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." They held each other as 3 years of pain and longing poured out in tears and whispered apologies. Madame Ellahor watched from her chair, seeing clearly for the first time the depth of what she had destroyed. "I married Chioma because I was broken," Derek murmured against Amara's hair. "I thought if I couldn't have love, I might as well have the practical marriage my mother wanted. But I never loved her. I couldn't. My heart belonged to you. And now? Amara asked, pulling back to look into his eyes. Derek cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the 3 years we lost. If you'll have me. If you can forgive me for not fighting harder. There's nothing to forgive, Amara said, covering his hands with hers. We were both victims of fear and manipulation. Derek turned to his mother, his expression a mixture of love and disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. Mama, I love you. You're my mother, and nothing will change that. But what you did was unforgivable. You stole 3 years from us. You cost us our child. Madame Elahor wept openly now, her pride finally, completely broken. I was so afraid of losing you. After your father died, you were all I had left. You never would have lost me, Derek said gently. But you might lose me now if you can't accept the woman I choose to love. The older woman looked at Amara, seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a threat, but as the woman who had endured 2 weeks of abuse without complaint, who had comforted her enemy in her darkest hour, who had loved her son enough to let him go. I'm sorry, Madame Elahor whispered, the words barely audible. Amara, I'm so very sorry. Amara knelt beside the chair, taking the older woman's hands in hers. I forgive you. But more importantly, you need to forgive yourself and learn to trust in love instead of fear. 6 months later, Derek and Amara exchanged vows in the mansion's garden, surrounded by friends and family. Madame Elahor, humbled and changed, walked Amara down the aisle, whispering a prayer of gratitude for second chances and the transformative power of unconditional love. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting back, but from loving forward, with patience, with grace, and with the unshakable belief that truth and love will always find their way home. Love's greatest triumph isn't in conquest, but in forgiveness. When we choose understanding over vengeance, patience over pride, we create space for miracles to unfold. Amara's gentle strength reminds us that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is unwavering kindness, and that true love, tested by time and trial, emerges not weakened, but purified, ready to heal not just 2 hearts, but an entire family's wounded soul.